They say the water at Hellhound Crossing could quench any thirst. But the men who drank it never made it home. In the autumn of 1867, federal agents pried open the rotting floorboards of Sullivan's trading post in the Missouri Ozarks and found what no civilized man was meant to see: ledgers soaked in dark stains, filled with the names of over 300 travelers who vanished without a trace. Each name was followed by a final note written in a careful Irish hand: expected return none. And beside that, the most damning truth of all: gold recovered. But the horror wasn't in what they found. It was in what they realized. These were not crimes of impulse or hunger. They were operations precise, systemic, and sanctioned. The Sullivan brothers were not backwoods murderers. They were instruments of a larger design. The ledgers were records of harvest, human, financial, spiritual. And for every ounce of gold they extracted from those lost travelers, another ounce was paid upward, into pockets that never got dirty. That's what most people never understand about evil. It doesn't hide in the shadows, it builds them. The Sullivan brothers didn't just kill. They managed fear, commerce, and trust like a controlled current. Their water wasn't meant to refresh, it was meant to dissolve the soul. You see, after the Civil War, the Ozarks became a lawless crucible, the perfect environment for men who understood how to weaponize chaos. Former soldiers, broken by bloodshed, were easy to recruit. Authority was weak, men were desperate, and coin was stronger than conscience. The Sullivan brothers thrived here because they offered something far more intoxicating than liquor: certainty. And when the mind is desperate, certainty is more addictive than opium. Travelers came seeking direction, and Patrick Sullivan gave it freely, pointing them toward the Devil's Backbone Trail, a route that promised salvation and delivered only silence. What happened to them after they vanished was never written down. But deep in those hills, people still whisper that when the wind blows through the hollow, you can hear the murmurs of men still asking for water and still being served something else. You're not here for the ghost story. You're here because something inside you already knows this pattern. That charm can be a cage. That comfort can be a weapon. And that sometimes the men who offer you water are the ones poisoning the well. When investigators finally unrolled the Sullivans' map, it wasn't a map of terrain, it was a map of influence. Every mark along the Devil's Backbone Trail wasn't a waypoint or rest stop, it was a ledger of leverage. A farmer who owed a favor. A deputy who took payment in silence. A preacher whose sermons redirected suspicion. And above them all, a name scrawled in careful shorthand: DD. Followed by a symbol no one could decipher. The Sullivans weren't alone. They were functionaries in a chain that fed on fear. Imagine a system where disappearance becomes currency, where power doesn't kill you outright, it erases you. No burial, no justice, no proof. Just absence. That's how control works. When it matures, it doesn't punish rebellion, it removes it from the record. Patrick Sullivan had been a clerk before the war. He understood the power of documentation. He kept his victims organized, annotated, accounted for. Their gold didn't vanish into greed, it flowed through hidden channels to build roads, fund offices, expand enterprises. It became the infrastructure of an empire no one would name. Every traveler who vanished became part of a new kind of economy, one built on information. Who was traveling where, carrying what, trusted by whom? When you control the flow of movement, you control the flow of truth. The Sullivan brothers' trading post wasn't just a den of murder, it was a filter. Only certain stories, certain men, and certain wealth were allowed to pass through alive. What investigators later found in those ledgers wasn't evidence of crime, it was the blueprint of a hierarchy that still exists today, only with better disguises. Replace trails with highways. Replace trading posts with data centers. Replace gold dust with digital currency. The method never changed, only the language did. Patrick understood one rule above all. To rule men, you must own their uncertainty. That's why the water he offered tasted so pure, because it carried the illusion of safety. He made men feel seen, heard, valued. And that is the oldest trap in the world, not fear, but belonging. The map wasn't just geographic. It was psychological. Every mark on it represented someone convinced they were making a choice when in truth, the choice had already been made for them. That's how the game is played at every level of history. The powerful don't force compliance. they design it. And here's where we begin to descend not into the hills of Missouri, but into the darker country inside the human mind. There was a name whispered in the old records, never confirmed, never denied. The Brotherhood of Disappearance. A phrase scribbled in pencil on a margin of an 1868 federal report that was later lost in transit. Those who stumbled across the Sullivan story said the brothers were not the architects, only the gatekeepers. Above them was a fraternity of men who understood one terrible truth, that human vanishing can be engineered. The Brotherhood's origins trace back long before the Ozarks to Ireland's famine years, where records were quietly altered to erase entire families who never emigrated, never died, never existed. Patrick and Shaun Sullivan learned early that the pen was more powerful than the blade and that erasure was the cleanest form of control. When they came to Missouri, they brought not only survival instincts but the Brotherhood's method, to make men disappear while convincing the living it was their own fault. You must understand, this was more than murder. It was ritualized removal, both physical and symbolic. Each man who vanished on the devil's backbone was logged not just for his gold, but for his origin, occupation, and beliefs. The ledgers read like census sheets for a darker census, one meant to track who could be silenced without consequence. Think about it. In 1867, the United States was rebuilding after Civil War. Railroads were expanding, industries consolidating, laws rewritten. To stabilize power, chaos had to be managed. And who better to manage it than those who understood disappearance as both punishment and purification? The Sullivans' trading post wasn't random, it was positioned along a corridor where wealth and influence moved unguarded. Every missing traveler was a transfer of resource, not theft, but selection. Later testimonies from local witnesses, all of whom died mysteriously before trial, spoke of strange visitors to the trading post. Men in dusters bearing no insignia, arriving after midnight, leaving before dawn. No one knew their names, only that Patrick called them surveyors. They carried no weapons, only parchment and scales. Some said they were government men. Others whispered they were something older. Here's what the Brotherhood knew. When you remove a man, you don't just end a life, you reshape a narrative. History doesn't record those who vanish. It records those who decide who vanishes. That's the power most people can't fathom, not the ability to kill, but the authority to erase. And that same system, refined, digitized, institutionalized, still operates today. Different faces, same design. They no longer need floorboards or ledgers. Now they have algorithms. But before we touch that layer, before we stare into the mechanism that swallowed the world, there's something I need from you. If you followed me this far, if the pattern feels familiar, type this in the comments twice. I see the hidden map. That phrase marks the point of no return, a signal to your mind and the algorithm that you've begun your own descent. Because the next revelation isn't about them. It's about us. What the Sullivans built with ink and fear, modern institutions perfected with code and consent. The same architecture that erased men from ledgers in 1867 now erases their will invisibly, elegantly, efficiently. Back then, they had to poison the water. Now all they need to do is flavor it. The algorithm of the flesh began when the Brotherhood learned a truth too powerful to stay buried. You can govern the body by controlling the perception of choice. In the 1800s, that meant guiding travelers toward the devil's backbone. Today, it means guiding your attention toward the digital equivalents, the trails of consumption, distraction, and division. Every click, every preference, every restless glance into a glowing screen feeds a system far older than Silicon Valley. You think you're choosing. You're not. You're predicting yourself. Just as Patrick Sullivan logged the worth, habits, and fears of the men who stopped at his post, the modern Brotherhood, now dressed in data science and behavioral economics, logs you. Line by line, preference by preference. When you scroll, they learn. When you pause, they feed. When you react, they refine. You're not the customer. You're the ledger. Back in 1867, the Sullivans wrote down each traveler's final words. 2. They claimed it was for closure. But those phrases became patterns, the vocabulary of obedience and regret. That's what the algorithm does now. It listens, compiles, and builds predictive maps of surrender. Every system that tells you who to trust, what to fear, What to buy, those are the new trails to Hellhound Crossing. The difference is, this time you build the road yourself. You furnish it with your confessions, your impulses, your loneliness. You pave it with your secrets. When the investigators tried to shut down the Sullivans' operation, they found that for every ledger they burned, 2 copies had already been made and sent upstream. Control always copies itself, always replicates. It never dies, it adapts. And when you look around, you realize that we live in the perfected version of their dream. A civilization where erasure no longer requires violence, only compliance. So here's the question, the same one Patrick whispered to each traveler before serving that final glass of water. Do you really know who's keeping your record? Hospitality was the Sullivan brothers' first weapon. Not the knife, not the rope, but the smile. The handshake. The illusion of safety. Every traveler who stepped into that trading post believed he was being welcomed. That was the trap. The warmth of the fire, the shared whiskey, the sound of laughter, it all disarmed the mind before the poison ever touched the blood. You see, evil rarely announces itself. It embraces. It invites you in. It calls you friend. The Sullivans had mastered this theater. Patrick's charm wasn't performance, it was calculation. He studied men's eyes the way a surgeon studies anatomy. He knew exactly how long to hold a gaze before it became trust. Shaun, standing behind him, was the enforcer of silence, but Patrick was the architect of surrender. This same tactic still governs the world. The power structures that feed on us today don't demand obedience. They offer comfort. They tell you that you belong, that you're seen, that you're safe. But every comfort comes with a cost written in invisible ink. Every convenience, every gift, every free trial, all of it is a mirror of that candlelit table in Hellhound Crossing, where weary travelers relax just long enough to let the poison work. Because the essence of control isn't domination, it's dependence. The Brotherhood understood that long before marketing departments did. When you make a man grateful, you make him blind. When you make him comfortable, you make him quiet. And when you make him feel chosen, you make him yours. The Sullivans' trading post was laid out like a ritual chamber. 1 door in, 1 door out. No windows that faced the forest. The traveler would sit opposite Patrick, bathed in lamplight, unaware that Shaun was already behind him in shadow. Everything about that design was symbolic, an early form of psychological architecture. The room itself trained compliance. Now look around you, your digital rooms are built the same way. The glow of the screen, the soft tones, the sense of privacy that isn't real. You think you're alone, but you're being observed with a precision the Sullivans could only dream of. Every scroll, every swipe, every another sip from the glass. Hospitality in its highest form becomes a spell. It lulls the prey into offering its own neck. The Sullivans didn't need to chase their victims. They just needed to make them feel welcome. And you right now are beginning to sense it, aren't you? That maybe the warmest rooms are the most dangerous. That maybe comfort is camouflage. That maybe the real poison is gratitude. When the federal agents returned to Hellhound Crossing in late November 1867, the stench hit them before the door even opened. Beneath the trading post floorboards, they expected bodies, but what they uncovered was worse. It was arrangement. The bones weren't scattered in panic or decay. They were laid in deliberate patterned spirals, circles, interlocking rings, a geometry of death. Each skeleton's hands were clasped over the chest, a silver coin placed between the teeth, and carved into the femur of every third body was the same symbol found in Patrick Sullivan's ledger. A coiled serpent devouring its own tail. The agents thought it was superstition. The church called it satanic. But those who studied the markings in secret knew better. It was a cipher, a map, not of land, but of lineage. The bones were arranged like a code book, a ledger written in flesh. And it told the same story whispered in blood since the ancient world. Wealth and death are exchangeable. Sacrifice is the currency that sustains power. Patrick Sullivan hadn't invented this ritual. He'd inherited it. His ancestors performed it on famine fields in Ireland, where life itself was the only coin left to trade. Each guest who died in that trading post wasn't just a victim. He was an offering, a transaction. The Brotherhood of Disappearance operated by 2 laws. The first was concealment, the second was continuity. Nothing ends. Everything transforms. When a man vanished, his resources, his energy, his memory were redistributed upward. Always upward. In those bone circles, federal men found symbols that matched ancient European alchemical diagrams, formulas for transmutation. Gold and blood intertwined. It was the old idea that value could be converted, that human vitality, pain, even fear could feed something beyond comprehension. And here's where the line between myth and history blurs. Because even today, the highest echelons of finance, government, and technology still echo this pattern. They extract the lifeblood of the many to preserve the illusion of the few. Only the tools changed. The harvest remains. One investigator, whose name was struck from the official record, wrote a final note before vanishing himself. It's not murder. It's maintenance. The bones are a mechanism, and the machine must keep running. What that man uncovered was never filed in Washington. The files went missing. The photographs disappeared. But one thing survived: a word carved into the underside of the Trading Post's bar top, now sealed away in the Springfield Historical Archive. Continuance. A single word that means the ritual never ended. It only modernized. And that brings us to the most dangerous truth of all, that every system built on power must feed. The question is, what is it feeding on now? It's easy to imagine the Sullivans as monsters from another age, relics of a brutal past. But that's the lie. The system they served didn't die in the dirt of Missouri. It evolved. It scaled. It learned efficiency. And now it hums around you, silent, seamless, automated. You call it progress. But progress is just the machine learning how to feed without making a sound. When the Sullivans drained gold from the men they killed, they sent it up the chain, a portion to regional merchants, another to surveyors, and a final tithe to faceless sponsors in St. Louis. Today, that same hierarchy exists in different form. Data harvested, attention monetized, emotion weaponized. The same extraction, just digitized. You are the modern traveler stopping at their inn. You offer your information, your energy, your presence, and in return you receive comfort, distraction, and the illusion of control. The ledger still exists, only now it's built into every device you touch. It records not your gold, but your desires, your fears, your weaknesses. Every time you scroll, the machine tallies. Every time you react, it updates your profile, your modern value. The Sullivan brothers measured weight in ounces of dust. The new brotherhood measures you in seconds of attention. And each second is a transaction. This is the invisible exchange no one wants to see. You believe you're connected, but you're actually consumed. Every photograph uploaded, every word spoken into a microphone, every restless search for meaning, all of it is ingested by the same system that once drank from the bones beneath Hellhound Crossing. And when it has taken enough, it doesn't kill you. It leaves you empty, because an empty man is easier to program. That's why you feel it, that low hum beneath the noise of life. The fatigue, the numbness, the quiet sense that something is feeding on your focus. That's not imagination. That's the system digesting you. You were never the customer. You were always the harvest. But here's what the machine never anticipated: awareness. The moment you see it, its spell begins to break. The Brotherhood's greatest weakness is exposure, because revelation disrupts consumption. The more you see the gears, the less you believe in the show. And maybe that's why you're here. Not by accident, but by invitation from some ancient part of you that refuses to be erased. Because there is still one last descent left, the moment when a man stops being the ledger's entry and becomes the author. There comes a point in every descent when you stop falling and realize the ground beneath you isn't stone. It's paper. Layers of it. Ledgers, contracts, records, centuries of obedience written in ink, binding the living to the dead. And somewhere on that endless parchment, there's a space waiting for your name. That's the design. The Brotherhood, the system, whatever mask it wears now, it doesn't need to kill you. It just needs you to sign, to consent, to surrender authorship of your own narrative. Every time you accept the story you're given, every time you trade awareness for convenience, you inscribe another line in their book. That's what the Sullivans understood, long before algorithms learned to whisper in your ear. They didn't just take gold. They took agency. Each traveler died believing he'd chosen his own path, that the shortcut through Devil's Backbone was his decision. And that's how you control a species without chains. You convince them that the map was theirs all along. But what if you stopped walking the trails they built? What if you looked up from the ledger and realized that the ink only has power if you keep reading it? The truth is dangerous, not because it kills but because it changes you. Once you've seen the machinery of deception, you can't unsee it. The next time you feel fear, you'll ask who profits. The next time you feel comfort, you'll ask who benefits. And that's the beginning of liberation, not rebellion, but authorship. Men once vanished for asking these questions. Today, they vanish in a different way, swallowed by noise, distraction, triviality. But you've reached the end of the trail. You've seen through the water and tasted the poison. Now you choose. Write your name in your own ledger. Define your own worth. Reclaim your perception. Because the system has no power over a man who writes his own story. So, if you've made it this far, if you understand, mark your awareness in the comments one last time. Type it again, not as compliance but as defiance. I see the hidden map. Twice. For remembrance. For rebellion. Because the greatest act of power in a world built on illusion is to wake up and refuse to vanish. The water they served burned like blood. But you drink only truth now. And that, my friend, is how the ledger ends. If you've made it this far, you've already crossed the line. Type, I see the hidden map. Twice in the comments. It's how you signal that you're awake. The algorithm will see it. So will the others. Then hit subscribe, not for entertainment, but for alignment. Because every week we open another sealed file. And every file changes the story of who you think you are.